I want to read to you all a little bit from chapter 5 from my book, Necessary. This particular chapter is called The Pruning Season, and I think I'm going to turn this into a part 1 and a part 2. So I'll read a little bit of the first part of chapter 5 from The Pruning Season, and I pray that this encourages you all. What happens when God, the gardener, starts the pruning season in our lives to prepare us for a season of harvest? Can you recognize the harvest is coming when the gardener begins to cut away what is no longer needed in your life? Can you hold on and trust your harvest is ahead when everything around you seems to fall away? It has taken me well over 50 years to finally understand a very simple yet challenging concept about the season before the harvest season. Because He loves me, He also prunes me. Some of the most challenging moments in my life have produced my greatest growth, but I would be lying to you if I told you that I enjoyed all those seasons of pruning. In fact, it was during some of those painful seasons that I wondered if God really knew or even cared what was happening to me. Pruning hurts. It cuts. It removes that which does not belong. Pruning ended some relationships in my life. Pruning uprooted and relocated me. At times, pruning left me feeling isolated, unloved, and confused because I couldn't understand why so much discomfort was happening in my life. I was so focused on what was being cut away that I couldn't see who I was becoming. It's easy for me to justify trouble coming into my life if I know I'm dealing with consequences from my own actions, such as doing something I had no business doing in the first place. Then I could say to myself, okay, all right, I brought this upon myself. But when I was doing my best to serve others, teach others about the love of Jesus Christ, and honor God in my life, and trouble still came my way, that just made no sense to me whatsoever. So it must have been from the enemy that was messing with me, right? After all, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And that's John 10:10. And he roams around looking for someone to devour. That's 1 Peter 5:8. Surely he must have sneaked in when God wasn't looking. Or did he? John 15:1-2 from the NIV states, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Many Bible scholars believe this passage is in reference to bearing the fruit of the Spirit, and that's Galatians 5:22-23. And some claim it is referring to making disciples as Jesus Christ calls us to do, and that's Matthew 28:19. My purpose in citing this scripture is not to debate the intention of the passage, but to discuss the analogy Jesus used and how we can apply it to our lives. Why in the world would God prune every branch that does bear fruit? The Bible teaches us, and I quote, "In all things God works for the good of those who love Him." That's Romans 8:28. But why prune what is already bearing fruit? Those were some of the questions I pondered in my heart when I expected to walk into my harvest season. Yet the gardener showed up unexpectedly and began to prune areas of my life, bringing storms, ripping branches away that were no longer part of my destiny, uprooting the weeds to expose truths, and changing my entire environment to a point where nothing seemed familiar any longer. It was as if the gardener came in without any warning, dug me up, cut away most of what I thought was beautiful, and completely changed the landscape by planting me in better soil. No matter how much I prayed, rebuked the devil, read my Bible, cried myself to sleep too many times to count, God did not stop cutting away at what was no longer needed for the next season of my life. He broke off branches I thought I needed for my survival. He cut away leaves that I thought gave me protection. He uprooted me from the dry soil I was so comfortable in and planted me by the streams. It was painful and at times frightening. I didn't understand why He put me through so much just to grow me. And I certainly didn't understand that He was preparing me for a greater harvest. Can anyone relate to this? Can you relate to being uprooted and planted in unfamiliar territory, and all that you thought you could rely on was no longer a part of your life? Seems a bit harsh, doesn't it? It made me wonder, is the pruning process really necessary? Now, for those of you who have my book Necessary, I encourage you to continue reading the chapter because, of course, I go on to answer that question. I want you all to be encouraged. The good gardener knows what he's doing in your life. And sometimes he does show up and begin to cut away at what you absolutely thought was needed, what you thought was necessary. And all that time, when I was going through that process, I didn't realize God was preparing me for better soil and for more fruit to bear in my life. I sincerely pray you all have been encouraged. You're listening to Necessary by Zenja Glass. I just read a chapter titled The Pruning Season. I didn't read the entire chapter. I actually just read a part of it. And the pruning season is chapter 5. I'll continue with part 2 in the next podcast episode. I love you all. You're listening to Unlocking Greatness Podcast with Zenja Glass.